There you go.
So, hello, I'm Ernie Hunter, as you've already heard. I'm second generation, as it's called. My father, who was a communist, who was not Jewish, had to flee Germany because he was an opponent of Hitler. And my mother, who was halakhically Jewish, had to flee Germany because she was Jewish. And they met here in Welsh Wales and happily got married there. And hence I'm here in the UK. They were first generation. I count as what's called second generation. And I've been in Holocaust education now, I'm guessing for about 10 plus years, including pre-COVID, visiting Germany, my mother's hometown, to talk about our family there. I also chair this thing called NHEG. You see with my name, Ernie H. NHEG, Northern Holocaust Education Group. So the subject we have for tonight is why teach the Holocaust? And it was born out, this particular presentation was born out of requests from Manchester Diocese, Terry Hart, if you know, and Blackburn Diocese, that was Helen Stone and Fiona Ashton, if you know them. And it's been modified very, very slightly since then. And during this, I'm afraid I'm going to be asking you questions, and I really, really would like you to not mute yourself, i.e. to unmute yourself, to be able to answer the questions for me. And having asked various questions, I then want to say how NHEG may be able to help support Holocaust education and Holocaust teachers. So, hello and welcome. Now, this should have gone forward. Now it's gone forward. People always ask me for a brief introduction to the Holocaust, which I'm afraid is impossible at all. It's a very complex story, and you can't even teach it in half an hour. So I've got a couple of quotes just to set as a background what we're talking about, although I suspect you know more than I do. The Holocaust is really the systematic state-sponsored persecution and mass murder on an industrial scale of 6 million Jews by the Nazi German regime, its allies, and its collaborators. And the Holocaust evolved, the word evolved is very important, throughout Europe, obviously starting in Germany, between 1933 and 45. Technically, the Holocaust is 1941 to 1945. And this is a quote or abstract from a memorial at Auschwitz. If you've been, you will have seen it. I haven't been, I couldn't do it, I'm afraid. And it again summarizes, when we look at Auschwitz, we see the end of the process. And it's important to remember that the Holocaust did not start with gas chambers. This hatred started gradually, developed from words, stereotypes, prejudices, and through legal exclusions, dehumanizations, and escalating violence. And if that's from Auschwitz, you will be aware that Gillian Keegan, the the education secretary, recently wrote these words. I've missed some out, as you can see from the dots, and it's saying exactly the same. It didn't start in the concentration camps, but in the streets, in the classrooms, the workplaces. There were poisonous words and passive acceptance of discrimination, and that became the norm. And she goes on to say, which I think is so important, and it's part of what NHEG is about, we must never sit by and let other people's hate go unchecked. I think it's so, so important, that bit. So please make sure you're unmuted, because 3 questions, I'll give you the questions, and then we'll go through each one. Why should we do Holocaust education? I'd love to know your views. Is the main objective historical knowledge? Again, your views, please. And importantly, is it working? Is Holocaust education working? So, just a quick one. Why Holocaust education? Would anybody like to help me on this? By the way, I should point out my hearing aid batteries are old, So please do speak up.
Stacey?
Should I start? Because nobody
Go.
else is in. So I'm kind of in mixed feelings about Holocaust education, actually, because I think that if it's not done well, we can actually kind of negate, I think, some of the purposes behind it. So it's a bit like the more gore you see, the less horrified you are, type thing. So sometimes we can run the risk of desensitizing people. And I think that on occasion, again, when it's not done well, it's almost as if the only time people learn about Jewish people is with the Holocaust, and therefore that's not necessarily a positive aspect. And it's not the only example in the world of persecution. And so sometimes I feel that it's propagating more stereotypes and less understanding than actually it could be. And actually, I have an issue with the word Holocaust as well, if I'm really honest, because Holocaust comes from the Greek, meaning a sacrifice, to burn whole or to destroy completely, a sacrifice. And I doubt very much if most of those people felt that they were sacrificing themselves for a cause. So I know in other terms it's called Shoah, and I much prefer to use that terminology than Holocaust. So sorry, those are just my first thoughts. You did tell us to come off mute and speak, so I have.
Excellent, excellent points, and I appreciate you speaking. Is there anybody else wanting to make some points or whatever? But Stacey, that was excellent, and many thanks.
I mean, personally, I agree with Stacey on lots of the things that she said. And I think it's interesting that when you're speaking from a Jewish perspective, I think you almost have a right to be able to make some of those challenges. I'm not sure that's always the case if you're non-Jewish. So I think there is an issue around Holocaust education about the background of the person who's speaking. So one of my colleagues, Rabbi Black, who used to be the rabbi in Newcastle, was very opposed to Holocaust education on the grounds that it victimized Jews. And that was the background that it was giving, the information about the Jewish nation. And there was other things that should be going on. So I can hear all of those, but I also think that it is perhaps the single most important large-scale study of some of the most vile human behavior that we have in the last 300 years. It's certainly accessible. We have people in living memory who've been through this. And as we're seeing now on the news, similar, and Stacey said, other genocides and other things are happening. So I think unless we do remember and listen and learn from these experiences, how else are we going to touch them? So how you teach it is really important in relation to Stacey's concerns about what it does if it's done badly.
Hugely, sorry?
I was going to say, and also, sorry, Karenza, sorry, Ernie, and also why you're teaching it, because I think sometimes if the question is about, well, how can a whole nation be that evil, I think is a very different question to, looking at, well, what can we learn about Jewish people from the Holocaust? It's a very different question. So again, I think it's how it's why it's taught, I think, and therefore what lens you use to look at it.
Brilliant. I'm hoping to pick up many or some of the points that Henry raised. The objective in terms of why Holocaust education, let's just look where I've picked up from other things. There was a conference here, as you may or may not be aware, in Stockholm Conference. Goran Pettersson, who was I think the equivalent of Prime Minister in Sweden, and he said it happened once, it shouldn't have happened, but it did. It mustn't happen again, but it could, and therefore education about the Holocaust is fundamental. So that was his perspective. And I've put a lot of other items down here. It's about the moral, the political and spiritual questions raised by the events, to unpack and analyze decisions taken or not taken by a range of people at the time of emerging crisis. And underlying, I think, all that we're saying and background to what we're saying, prevent it happening again, prevent genocides, standing up against hatred, discrimination, racism, and persecution of any kind, with the key phrase, never again. I hope people can agree with what has been said and the words I've put here, as the whole objective is to try and make us, shall we say, better people as a whole across the world. If we're there, Holocaust education in the UK has been going on since, well, really over 30 years. Simple as that. It's mandatory in the history curriculum. And we've got all of these things here. And the question on a broader perspective is, I appreciate this is UK education, but in the world, have things improved since we said never again at the end of World War II? And this is an example list. You will have many other countries and instances to add to it. It's just my random list more than anything else. And here we are, never again, and it's still going on. And then coming back into the UK, this is just anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic incidents. And it went down a bit in 2022, but as you're probably aware in the press, is going through the roof at the moment in 2023. And if we had time, I could produce the same graph. I say the same graph, and maybe the word similar is better, for Islamophobia. And we don't seem to have learned about hatred of the other, as I believe it's called. So, are the lessons being learned? I'm not going to ask you. But I am going to now talk about two important words to me. And the important words, or I'm fond of these words, are about and from. And the reason I say that is the focus seems to be learning about the Holocaust. The dates things happen, the background, the locations, the perpetrators, the bystanders, the victims, the rescuers, facts galore, etc. And people are being trained about the Holocaust. The story is very, very complex. Are we losing the from? What are the lessons that really we should be learning from the Holocaust? And again, by the way, this is not meant to be absolutely right or anything. There are many other words you can add on in terms of lessons from. What are the lessons from the Holocaust? It's about discrimination, hatred of the other, tolerance, religion, human rights, democracy, persecution. The 6 million is just a statistic. Whatever happened to individuals or families? Stalin was reputed to say, a million, this is not the Holocaust, 1 million within Russia in various ways have been murdered. He said that's a statistic. One person murdered, that's a tragedy. So here we need to find out, are we getting the lessons from there? And as has been said, I think by Stacey, there were other victims during this period. Believe it or not, the disabled, Jehovah's Witnesses, Roma and Sinti, you may know them as travelers, political opponents. And there are hugely varying experiences throughout the whole of Europe during this Holocaust period. And what we as you'll hopefully see shortly, is trying to provide is enrichment to it. The vehicle is for you to start it and then to create the discussions and so on afterwards. So NHEG is about enrichment and the from bit, to create conversations afterwards about individuals and family. So going on, at the very periphery, I should say, I've been involved with research with Andy Pearce of UCL. I'm sure you know UCL is one of the centres of learning about the Holocaust. And although this later on says hot off the press, it's now actually about 2 or 3 months old. So it depends what you mean, hot off the press. And he's done a lot of research. Where in the curriculum is the Holocaust taught, and where should it be taught? in the educational establishments that you're aware of, where is it taught and where should it be taught? Anybody want to take a view?
Well, it's taught in Key Stage 3 history, and it's sometimes taught in RE. Increasingly, actually, it's being taught in Year 6 in some primary schools. But again, it's, as Stacey said, I think it's about the perspective that you take on it. So what's the focus? What's the point? What are the outcomes? And how do you get a whole picture? RE can't do the whole picture. History can't do the whole picture. So if we have a very suitable curriculum, it builds across to do things that needed to be done. I'm also aware that I'm talking quite a bit and that Marianne and Julia need to be able to contribute too. So, you know, please do jump in, you guys.
They will come in a minute. By the way, these figures don't add up to 100% because the other headings remained constant. What I found interesting on the study was the changes over a 10-year period. Yes, it's in the national curriculum. Yes, it's taught in history. But if we are to try and learn the lessons from the Holocaust, is history the best place? And if you look over 10 years, it's becoming more and more into history, and I'm sorry to say this to you, and less into RE, where you'd be talking more about the from. And I don't know if you feel the same as me. About the Holocaust is important. The from is probably more important. And are we missing that in the education that we're doing? I can't answer that because I don't want to perjure or to insult a history teacher, but they're more into facts and figures. You're more into the morals and the meanings. So I only ask, are we moving in the right direction? And you have to make your own mind up. I've made my mind up, I'm afraid. And then picking up on the point that Karendra's just said, when is it taught and when should it be taught? Perhaps to save a little time, I'll just put this up. And again, these figures don't move much because after year 9, the figures hardly change over the 10 years. So just to focus on that. And what that is showing is that it's getting younger and younger over this period of time. Year 9 was half the pupils did it then. It's gone down to 39%, and year 8 it's gone up to 21%. Which is unbelievable because again, the younger you are you able to process the from bit of the message more than the about bit of the message? And interestingly enough, if I can throw a little fact in, from NHEG, we're the new group on the block, as we call ourselves. We've only been going around about 18 months, just over 18 months. 50 of the schools, forget the adults, of the schools where we are hosted, where people invite us in, 50% of the schools are primary schools where we talk to year 6. I'll come back to that, where we'll only do kinder transport stories for that age group and nothing else. And talking of kinder transport, I don't think I need in this audience to talk about tell you what kinder transport is. It was the rescue mission. It ended up about 10,000 children, Kinder being the German for children, from Czechoslovakia, Germany, and Austria, where the UK hosted them. And you had to be, I think, under 17 to be on that Kinder transport. And this is just a photograph of, I shall say, a random group, if that's the right thing. And so if we go into year 6 in a primary, it's enrichment about refugees, hatred, bullying, etc. Again, I'll come to more. Now for a difficult question. In your opinion, maybe your own opinion, I don't know, but it was a survey by UCL of young people. Who was directly responsible for the Holocaust? Does anybody want to shout out an answer? As I say, I can't see your faces, unfortunately. Well, let's try Marianne. We've got A, B, C, D, and E.
I think either A or B, but I think like blame does get put on like ordinary people and as like a country as a whole. you know, when you talk about like concentration camps, they say like Polish concentration camps. So maybe like some people would say the Germans.
Okay. Does anybody want to challenge that, or are we all reasonably comfortable? I shall take it as...
I'd say it's Hitler, because I think that it's easy to demonize. It's easy to put it into one place, and I think Hitler becomes the star of the evil show, which is not very helpful to actually looking at what did happen and why.
Well,
I think.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, I also wanted to add in there that I'm aware that in Germany, all pupils have to learn about the Holocaust, but they do it from the perspective of this is what we did as a country. We should never do this again. So, in a way, I know that the question is asked of what's most young people's view, but I suppose what I'm asking is, this survey, does that include German children? Because some of them might acknowledge or take responsibility for that, because that's what they're taught in schools.
Excellent comment, and I'm really delighted you've made it, because it means that I have introduced this little question incorrectly, and indeed the next question incorrectly. This is UK students only. So my apologies not for having said that, and I've never said that on the previous 2 occasions I've done this, and you're right in many ways to pick me up. I should have said that, and I apologize. And you're absolutely right in your comment. As I say, and pre-COVID, I've been across to Germany and spoken there on the Holocaust with my family, and they do learn about it, one must say that. So if I can just go forward, the answers given to the UCL survey by students, UK students, was very simple. Hitler was number 1, and then you get Hitler and the Nazis and a bit of Hitler and the Germans and the like. And the younger people are, the more it was focused on Hitler as an individual. And this is very interesting, because the correct answer as we see it is the Nazis and their collaborators. People had to collaborate. If you think in terms of France, the French police rounded up the Jews of France to put them into Drancy, which was a transit camp, for them then to be transported on, mainly to Auschwitz, but to other camps as well. In Holland, it was again the Dutch police, at the request of the SS, no doubt, who arrested them, put them into Westerbork, who were then transported on, again, east to the various camps. You can go to the Ukraine, whereby the Ukrainians were complicit in many ways. You've just lost the thing of the ravine, Babi Yar, where over 30,000 were just shot and dropped into a ravine, safe digging trenches. Without collaborators, this could not have happened. So that is a view. So we're going to get to another
Ernie,
question. Yes.
I'll just chuck in something I learned there from Martin Gilbert's History of the Holocaust, that the Japanese wouldn't hand their Jews over.
Correct.
Because
also,
they felt that it was more threatening, that the Aryan kind of model was more intimidating and awful than the fact that they had these Jews who were Japanese, so they wouldn't do it. So I think that's really interesting. There were countries who stood up and said, no, we're not going to.
Well, it's I can't remember. I think it was looking Stacey who may have said it. We tend to look at many of the bad things, and I'm going to come back to that hopefully later on. But you need only think of Denmark, where in cooperation with the Swedes, who were neutral at the time, Denmark was occupied. They rowed, I can't remember the percentage, I'm going to say 90% of the Jewish population, they rowed, R-O-W-E-D, 90% of their Jewish population to Sweden, a neutral country, when they believed that there was to be a roundup, which I believe is correct information, that there was to be a roundup. So a huge proportion of the Danish Jews survived. Something people don't realize, Albania protected their Jews, and Albania is a Muslim country, let us not forget, then and now. They did fabulous in doing that. So one of the things I want to talk about is, of the 6 million unarmed Jewish men, women, and children murdered in the Holocaust, about 1.5 million were shot, one on one. This is just an illustrative photograph you can see here. They were shot 1.5 million. So the question now comes, if a member of the military or police refused an order to kill Jewish people, what do you think most UK young people believe would have happened to the refuser? So you can probably see me. Here I am with my rifle, taking aim and saying to my commanding officer, I don't fancy doing this. I don't think it's right. What punishment am I going to get? You've got 4. Would someone like to say that? Christine, would you like to give a view?
I think poor Christine's mic isn't work. The miking thing.
Okay, would someone else like to give a view?
If Christine pops it into the chat, if she possibly can, then we
now
could ask
I won't
Julia.
be seeing the chat because I've got my screens.
I can tell you, Ernie, don't worry. If
Brilliant.
Christine gets it in the chat, I can tell you. But Julia's there available as well.
Yeah, they could have been given another duty or sent to the Eastern Front or shot.
So you would go for a mixture of A, C, D.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously wouldn't go down very well. And they could have been shot. It did happen.
Yes.
It did happen.
And Germans kept good records. Anybody else with a view? Because if I can...
Christine put shot in the chat.
Well, there's what the young people think, of which the vast majority, not the majority, the vast majority again say, and it's by age group as well, not that it moves that much, the vast majority were shot for refusing an order. And as I say, German records were very, very well kept. And again, I had the privilege of meeting and talking to someone called Chris Browning, and he wrote a book about ordinary men, and this is Police Battalion 101 from Hamburg, which pre-Hitler, pre-33, was a communist stronghold. Obviously, this is many years later, nearly 10 years later. And it's not just in Police Battalion 101. People have been through all the military records they can. And there's been no example of someone ever having been found guilty or punished for refusing to shoot a Jew or anybody else. Indeed, the major responsible for Police Battalion 101, when they started their duties, they were part of what's called an Einsatzgruppen. Do people know what an Einsatzgruppen is?
No.
Right. Mopping up is perhaps the correct way. As the frontline troops advanced into Russia and so on, you had troops behind them mopping up as well. And then behind those, you had what are called Einsatzgruppen. There were 4 of them, A, B, C, D. And what they were doing is, where it wasn't, and I'm afraid the word is correct, economic to load Jews onto a cattle truck and take them to a concentration camp, a murder camp, they in fact went round into the villages, killing them, killing the Jews. Dig your own ditch. And they shot them one-on-one. That was the job of Police Battalion 101. And it was headed by a chap called Major Wilhelm Trapp. And he not merely didn't punish anybody. Before every shooting, he would say to his troops, it was a police battalion, if you don't feel you want to do it, step down. Obviously, they were given alternative duties, guarding the lorries that brought them and all this sort of thing. And on the first time that the Police Battalion 101 was in action in 13th of July 1942, just 12, but it's still 12, of the 486 men said, my words, don't fancy it. And were just given alternative duties. And as I say, in all the Einsatzgruppen who went around shooting one-on-one, there is no example of anybody being shot for for refusing an order and saying, I can't do it. So again, the correct answer is given another duty. They weren't sent to concentration camps. They weren't sent to the Eastern Front. And as I say, I need to remind you again, Roma, Sinti, disabled, Jehovah's Witnesses, political opponents also suffered in this. So again, some of the things. So that isn't the story of the Holocaust. It's just little bits to show the variety and the complexity of it, which brings me then to why NHEG? Because, and you'll see later on another logo called G2G, Generation to Generation. We work closely together and aim to cover the UK. Aspire is perhaps the better word to cover the UK, as we both knew. And we view that Holocaust education is the responsibility of the schools and the teachers. But the first generation who lived through this, the survivors, of course, have done a wonderful job. Would you believe the vast majority have, I'm afraid, sadly already died? And those that are left are infirm and certainly, I'm afraid, cannot continue forever. But the need continues. And it's to continue not just for anti-Jewish racism, which is the phrase I happen to prefer, but there again, as I say, that's my Victor Mill Jewish and pedanticness. Anti-Semitism is a word other people use. But it's also about all forms of hatred and discrimination across all the religions and disabled people, etc. It's all that. And our job in NHEG is to manage this transition from the first generation to the second and subsequent generations to give their family stories. So we have a small bank at the moment, but it is increasing as time goes along, of family stories from the Nazi period, so that the person we're talking about comes alive to try and get the reasons of the lessons from the Holocaust. And we also are quite proud. We have one story of a non-Jewish person in there, political opponent, a communist of Hitler as well. So we want people to spark and inspire and the audience to stand up against hatred, discrimination, and persecution of any kind. So how do we do it? Because we are an enrichment resource. We don't go in saying we will give you the full Holocaust story. That is for others to do. What we're trying to do is enrich for all sorts of audiences, adults as well as children, students. And we're very keen on things being age appropriate. I've already said in year 6, we will not do anything other than purely a kinder transport story. And similarly, we try and make things age appropriate, and we rarely go into all the gory bits, I'm afraid, because again, we think that can be overkill, not least with all the fiction going around on the Holocaust stories and the goriness there. We insist, we have a training program, that the content is engaging. The students these days, even the year 6, are all into either phones and modern things, and they've got their own iPads and Kindles and what have you not. So it has to be engaging content. It has to be engagingly delivered. And we're also absolutely clear on it has to be historically accurate. We have a Holocaust historian, and he checks that these things are accurate, whatever we say, etc. And that's important, that it's historically accurate. And if that's one side of the equation, the other side of the equation is life before the Nazi period. What was life like? And the dates change. In Germany, that's before 33. In Poland, it's before 1939, etc. So what was life like in these periods beforehand, depending upon the individual family, of course? What was life during the Nazi period? And again, it varies from country to country, simple as that, and other aspects. And what was life after the Nazi period? What was lost? How many were left, etc. Only from the point of view of that individual family or person. And just as a matter of interest, showing that we are trying to link from first generation through to second and subsequent generations, this is Tommy Kommerly, who is first generation Hungarian refugee. First, he survived. He was in Hungary during the Nazi period. So we have Tommy as well. And just to give you a flavour of the organisations we go and speak to, Holocaust, HMD is Holocaust Memorial Day. It's not always, the day is always on the 27th, but each of the local authorities have different dates. We do Llandudno, we've done Llandudno, Salford, St Anne's, we do the Prince's Trust, Blackburn Cathedral, Adiko as a business, and indeed we've just had R&C, Revenue and Customs, ask us to do one in January. Aberystwyth University, Cheshire East HMD, UWC, that's the United World Colleges Atlantic. I don't know if anybody knows about UWC. Do you know? Because we're quite happy to have done that one. There's a chap called Kurt Hahn, who was a famous Jewish German educationalist and had to flee the Nazi regime, came to the UK, was employed at a place called Gordonstoun, which the then Prince Charles hated, and it was his ethos that of Gordonstoun, of activities, open air life, as well as education. He also set up the Duke of Edinburgh Award for the then Duke of Edinburgh. And he also set up a number of UWCs, United World Colleges. The first is called the UWC Atlantic, midway between Swansea and Cardiff, St Donat's, I think it's called. And that is specialising in, as a sixth form college, people from around the world working together in sixth forms. And when I actually did this one, it was a wonderful sign to see, and particularly in our current situation, the Palestinian flag, the Israeli flag, the Indian flag, the American flag, the UK flag, across the world, students studying and working together and flying their own flags as well. And that was, there are now 6 of these UWCs throughout the world with a similar ethos. MMU, you may not know it, Manchester Metropolitan University, Leeds, JSOC, Rotary Clubs, U3A. These are just a couple of examples. On the left, as I see it, you've got Stuart Firster, that I think was Salford HMD. On the right, the lady in the middle without a chain is Leah Berman. And there are 8 gold chains there. And Leah hasn't got one, obviously. So although that was St Anne's HMD, 7 other local authorities from the area joined in it. It's quite an important event as there. So just to race through Webster, do people know Webster Primary School? It's in Moss Side in Manchester, and from that you probably can guess the next bit. And again, don't blame me if my stats are wrong. I'm going to say 95% of the people are Muslims and immigrants. Nothing wrong with that. Sorry, 95% Muslims, and I'm going to guess 50% recent immigrants in year 6. We've spoken to them about it. Brodetsky School, which is in Leeds, that's a Jewish school. King David, KD, that's Judith Heyman doing one of her talks. You'll hear a bit. That is Hannah Goldstone, not at Webster. She did Webster. And it was wonderful because when she asked the class, what would you take as a refugee? Fabulous to see that certainly the boys, because I listened in, said, I'd take a prayer mat, which I think was marvellous. So we've got all these church schools, sixth form colleges and so on. And that's another of our speakers, Martin Hyman, with the primary school year 6. We've also been, and Lorenzo knows the story, so we won't go into it, about Teen Newid Remand Hostel, which I did, Placid Wern Remand Hostel. And by the way, there were more people there than the 2 sets of legs you can see sticking out, but they're very nervous of taking photographs of people who are held within a secure environment. And Matthew Farrell wrote this spontaneously in addition to our feedback forms, because he opened quite a number of eyes. One person there had never voted in his life, and we discussed about Hitler coming to power initially democratically. And one of the people there said, I now want to register to vote. And if you can imagine, the whole objective of prison, well, the theoretical objective of prison is to move people onto the right path. That was considered a fabulous turnaround. So I'm now going to give what I call some extracts, if I can get my thing across here. Yeah.
Ernie.
Hello, my name is...
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I know you're going to mention this a bit later, but just to be clarifying, you've talked an awful lot there about the kind of the Holocaust Memorial Days and things. But this organisation that you work with is an all year round, all access organisation, isn't it? You'll come to anything.
Thank you very much. We are all the year round, going to both adults, I use adults, places of worship, sports clubs, first division sports clubs even, and obviously schools all the year round as well. January is particularly crowded. We do prefer if you don't use us in January, if we may say so. And this is Judith Heyman, and I'm just going to do a couple of examples from her talk to get a flavour.
Judith, and I am Jewish. Here I am pictured with my mum Charlotte about 10 years ago. She's the pretty one on the left. Her father always told her not to draw attention to herself and not to let on to anyone that she was Jewish. But why? I will share with you what I have discovered about the lives of my mum, her sister Frida, and their family during World War II. My mother was born and brought up in Austria. As you can see, it is a tiny country, Germany's neighbour to the south. You'll also notice Poland to the east. I'll be mentioning Poland in a short while. This story is not about the death camps. It is about how ordinary Christian Austrians, within a space of a few weeks, turned the 10 Commandments upside down. How it became legal to kill and to steal. How the police, the law, and even children were allowed to brutally attack rather than to love their neighbours. Let us.
Because of timing, I'm going to skip to, if I can work out from my notes where, 8:23, 25, 8:19 will do. This is now the Anschluss of Austria.
A month later, a rigged vote, you can see here, the yes for Hitler, yeah, is very big, and the no for voting for Hitler is very small. The rigged vote, which forbade Jews or Roma gypsies to take part, gave the Nazis a 99.7% approval. It is evident that the Austrian Nazis were working behind the scenes with the Germans before the Anschluss. The police station here, in my mother's hometown, was decked out in Nazi banners to welcome Hitler. Following the Anschluss, some Jewish children were dismissed from their schools the very next day. Others were made to sit at the back of the class, facing the wall. Friends with whom you would laugh one day refused to speak to you the next. The lists had already been efficiently drawn up in advance of the German invasion. Within a month, 16,000 primary and secondary pupils were transferred to 8 Jewish-only schools. Can you imagine how they felt to turn up for school one morning and told they had to go home and then to be sent to a different school? On May 20th, 1938, anti-Jewish laws were formally introduced to Austria. These racist laws, which had taken 5 years to be fully introduced in Germany, were brought in Austria within a few months after the Anschluss. For my mother, all hopes of going to university or leading a normal life disappeared. She could no longer visit a restaurant, theatre, exhibition, cinema, or swimming pool. She could, however, sit on a Jew-only yellow park bench and be jeered at. My aunt recalls this period.
The Anschluss was like a bad dream to us, one that was unbelievable. As I reflect on the years 1938 to 1939, it was probably a blessing that we could not comprehend what was happening nor anticipate what was ahead. I still can hear the Nazis singing their Horst Wessel song, with the words saying that Jewish blood must splash from our hands. When Hitler marched into Vienna, we were numb and confused. My husband was a lawyer, and on the first day of the Anschluss, his Jewish colleague hanged himself in my husband's office. The note he left said he knew what was coming and he could not deal with this. Another colleague was a voluntary lawyer for the Austrian Ambulance Corps. He was taken by the Gestapo and forced to give them legal papers. I mention this to highlight how much the Nazis were already informed and dealt with every minute detail already on that first day Hitler arrived in Austria. This shows how hard the Austrians worked as illegal Nazis before 1938 to gather information for and to please Hitler. Jewish lawyers were immediately forbidden to practice law. I had been offered a job as a pharmacist, but as a Jew was not permitted to work. Jews were expelled from the university and not permitted to work. We were frequently visited by the SS, and they took whatever items they wanted from our homes. This also occurred frequently with my parents and relatives.
So these are just samples of the story. I'm going to miss this. I'm going to miss this. And this is now Leah Berman. And where from my notes, I think I want to start.
Our guest speaker today is Leah Berman, a founder member of the Northern Holocaust Education Group. Kind.
I should say, by the way, we don't look for formal introductions other than on formal occasions like HMD, Holocaust Memorial Day, and this is St. Anne's, so hence there was a formal introduction, and this is the occasion when we had 8 local authorities listening in.
It is my pleasure to introduce Leah. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Robert. Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? My father, Siggy Landschaft, was born in 1925 and following the Second World War settled in London. That's how I come to be in England. He retired to Israel, where he now lives at the age of 97. He has always had a zest for life and looked forwards, rather than dwelling on his difficult past. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is ordinary people. My father came from an ordinary family, but is the only survivor. His family was murdered because they were Jews. And he survived due to the kindness of other ordinary people, for he was saved by Czech political prisoners.
I'm going to start. I can go back if we have further time, but I'm conscious of time. We may want to have hopefully some questions. What I wanted to do was go through a couple of quotes. One is from a chap called John Dewey, who is American, lived well over 100 years ago. And I thought this was an excellent quote about democracy from him, because he was saying you can't just open a textbook and teach pupils and students about democracy. You've got to experience it, understand it, see its imperfections and have debates and all that. That's what it's about, the actual thing. And I've therefore made this up based on what he has said. In other words, I've stolen his idea. And if you come back to what we're trying to say in NHEG, teachers cannot adequately prepare students for the lessons from the Holocaust just by transmitting a body of knowledge, in other words, about the Holocaust. And then I shall stop here, unless people want to continue beyond the hour and go back to some of the other examples of the sorts of talks we give, by a quote from my cousin. Albert Einstein said this: "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing." And we like to try and say to people, your voice is powerful, use it. Can I just ask, do you want me to go back over a couple of others so you get more of a idea as to the sorts of things that we do, or should we go?
I think only that we'd always try and keep to time. So given that we're in the last 5 minutes, and we can share this presentation if people would like to see that, I'm sure we can do that. I think it's important that we just give everyone a chance to sort of say what they'd like to say before we finish, really.
Correct. Any questions or views?
No question, but in the mid-1970s, I visited Dachau.
Dachau, yeah.
And I remember seeing photographs of those people who were in the concentration camp. Those who came in most recently were put on carts and taken round the local village of Dachau, which was very close to the concentration camp, and they were told to wave to people in Dachau, so that the people in Dachau would think that all was well. But I'm left with this memory that they can't have thought that all was well. They were so close. I know what's going on in my local villages, and I just we do. It's just too easy to be silent, but I am sure that people in the village of Dachau would have known what was going on in the concentration camp.
If I can just add to that, no, it wasn't just people in Dachau who knew what was going on. In the whole of Bavaria, everyone knew what was going on, and it was kept public because they wanted to make sure that people towed the line. So my uncle Rudolf Holly, was arrested in March 1933, one of 7 uncles who were arrested or had to go underground. He was incarcerated in Dachau already in March 1933, and to ensure that the family, the wider family, and by the way, Rudolf was on my father's side not Jewish. He was a communist and a political opponent of Hitler. He was arrested, and he actually was only released as by the Americans in 1945. He was there 12 years. You may wish to know that, in fact, going throughout Bavaria was the phrase, Lieber Gott, mach mich stumm, dass ich nicht nach Dachau komme, which means, dear God, it was a prayer, dear God, make me dumb, that I don't end up saying the wrong thing, in other words, I don't end up in Dachau. It was known. Another uncle, Max Holly, was there and played a cat and mouse game with by the Nazis and the SS, because he was arrested, put in, and then given good treatment, if that's the phrase, in other words, bad treatment, released and rearrested, and in particular just before Christmas. And again, you will be more aware of it than me as a Jew. Christmas is a very important festival. He was arrested at the beginning of, rearrested at the beginning of December, kept in a week, released, a week later rearrested for another week, and then released. The whole thing being to make sure that the family towed the line, particularly the women and so on. And that's a cat and mouse game. So if I may say, people did know what they didn't want to do is talk about it.
Mm. So to go back to your options when you were saying who was to blame here, you had Hitler at the top, and then you had Hitler and his collaborators. In fact, it's everyone who collaborates with it. The whole of society has a part to play.
Insufficient people put their head up above the parapet. And as has been shown, for example, with the troops, that if you did not voluntarily shoot a civilian, the example I gave obviously was Jewish ones, you were not yourself shot. You were just said, okay, go and guard the vans or the lorries or whatever you want to call them. So these are the family stories which put a lie to a lot of things. And again, you'll see I've got lots of, from my family, stories. Others have different things where we try and bring artifacts or documents. By the way, when I say documents, copies of documents around so that people can, again, see those documents. So, for example,
just while Ernie's going to find that, Christine and Marianne, please do Oh, there's something from Christine there to pay attention to as well. And you also, Mary.
Yeah, this is a document in the name of the state, in the name of the Reich, saying that on the 7th of April 1933, says he tried to find where the date is, there, on the 7th of April 1933, mother was forcibly retired. I'm really glad we have a physical distance between us. Despite being a woman and despite being Jewish, she was already at the age of 30 a senior civil servant in the German civil service, would you believe? And on the 7th of April, which is within days of Hitler gaining his powers, she was, I use the word fired, which is not technically correct. The law was passed that if you were Jewish, you were forcibly retired. And would you believe, at the age of 30, being a young woman on a pretty strong career path upwards, she did not want to retire, but she was forcibly retired. Just to fill that in, this is a rare document. It's not a unique document, but it's a rare document. Because if you wanted to, mother knew it was all anti-Semitism and so on, but who would have expected it to go where it did go? She demanded that her retirement, her forced retirement, was put in writing. In fact, it was refused, and if you were a male, you were beaten up. You can't see me properly, but my mother was up to my shoulder. She was small, tiny, but feisty, really feisty. And she worked herself up the Nazi hierarchy, the civil service managers, the Nazis were put in the place, hierarchy, ending up with the cabinet minister responsible for the Post, which is the equivalent of Royal Mail and British Telecom together. She'd been manhandled, thrown out, and all that from offices. But luckily she was a woman and feisty. So although she was manhandled, she wasn't beaten up. Men were beaten up and so on. But she got through to the president of the Post and demanded that she get a certificate. He threw her out, and a few days later, on the 14th of August is when this was written, but a few days after that, and she went to Berlin to see him. She lived in Stuttgart, which is several hours away by train, and got this certificate, handwritten, beautifully done, etc. It's one of her exceptionally small number because she was feisty.
Ernie, we could spend another 3 or 4 hours listening to these fascinating stories just from your own family background. And I don't want to do any injustice to the things that you're sharing. I think they're really important, but we are going to run out of time. So I'm just going to comment on Christine's point, and I'm going to bring Stacey. I think Christine said something really brave and important, actually. I'm just going to read what you said, Christine. And just incredibly interesting, having taught in primary schools in the past, the age of development was inadequate for the learning goals we aim to reach in RE. And I think that's something that an organisation like yours can help with in terms of saying to teachers, well, you'd like us to do this, but this is what we're prepared to do and why. So I think that's really important and brave, Christine, that teachers do listen and take cognizance.
And as I say, we've been asked to talk about really the murder camps and so on, and we were totally refused. If you want us, it's a kinder transport. If you want anything else, tough. We don't do it. You can go elsewhere. And I know of one person in Greater Manchester who does do that. We're dead against it.
Thanks. That's really helpful, Ernie. Right, Stacey, you, and then we'll give Marianne a chance to just finish off.
I just wanted to say that I think that one of the elements of what I think is very strong RE or history is about the people. And I think the examples that you've showed us and that you've talked through with us, Ernie, are a perfect example of how it's the people first, that it's not just facts or information, it's when we think about the individuals. Even when you were talking about would you get shot if you didn't follow the orders, and then you brought that fact and you thought about the people who were then refusing to do it. It's all about the people, and it comes back to people. And there's a phrase that's bandied around quite a lot, which is good RE starts with people. And I think this is a classic example of why that's important. And I think that some of the comments that, you know, were shared at the beginning about becoming desensitized or forgetting the importance of or the value of learning from it, I think all of that is negated when we focus on the people involved, the individuals involved. I know it was 6 million, but it's just a number. Whereas when we think about the individuals, and I think both pupils and us as adults can engage better with individuals.
I agree.
How important that approach is, I think.
Thank you.
What Ernie hasn't told you is that it can take his speakers up to 2 years to qualify to do what you've just seen. The North East Holocaust Education Group has one unbelievably rigorous process for becoming a speaker, and you know, you have to have your story, it has to be fact checked, you have to be able to present it, and then you go through a live presentation in front of peers who then will comment on whether or not that works, educationalists and all sorts, and I know that because I've been there. So this is very, very high quality work if you do get involved with this organization, which is why I'm very happy to recommend it and host Ernie. I will just give Marianne one quick opportunity to say anything she'd like to say.
Yeah, I just found it really interesting how you kind of distinguish between the facts and like the lessons that you can learn from like the facts, because then it comes kind of like more productive or like valuable to the students. But I'm wondering within like the curriculum and like time restraints, how you actually do kind of combat that complexity of the Sorrow Holocaust.
Right. We target all of our speakers to speak for about 30 minutes. So more is left out than put in. And would you believe it takes a heck of amount of time to bring it down rather than just keep talking, as I have, I'm afraid. So it's 30 minutes to meet the school timetables. There are people like me who book the trend. I'd often go to 35 minutes, but that's there. So we do that within that period. And we like the school then, if we're talking schools here, to use what we've said afterwards as much, because it's usually just a period that we get invited in. If I can just use an advert, don't forget you can use us. We do travel and we can also do Zoom, but we are firm believers in face-to-face when we can. And I'm sure you can contact us through Carenza, or I can put up our email if you want, if you haven't already got it.
I will happily send out, if you're happy for the presentation to go out.
Yes,
Ernie,
and if you can put our email on it.
I will do that. I will send out an email by the end of the week to everybody who's here to say this is the presentation that Ernie shared and this is the email address and how you can get hold of him. So I have not kept my own rule by going over time, and I apologize to everybody for that, but this was
my
a superb
fault. Blame me.
No, you never blame the participant. You always blame the chair. It is totally my responsibility, and I take that. But I was absolutely fascinated and gripped, and I've heard this now, and I still learn something new every single time. And Ernie, your commitment and education and just passion for making sure that it's so human and is massive. And so I think I just need a little round of applause and say thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll end by saying that obviously everybody here, thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do for people that you serve. And we will be around with other sessions online, which you're welcome to join. But I'll make sure that Ernie's contact details go right around the whole group because he's awesome. And so is every speaker in his organisation. I can absolutely recommend.
And we're happy to come to the Northeast or at least do it Zoom, whatever's appropriate.
Stacey's in London and she's got many, many local authorities there that she covers. And I think she'll be nabbing you very shortly because she's already asked me how you engage. So yes, Ernie,
and
we will make sure.
We've been to North London on the basis with the Northern Holocaust Education. So we've been to Finchley, Mill Hill, etc. It's part of Northern.
Well, I'm Cornish, so you're all North, so you can go where you like as far as I'm concerned. Right, I will end this session with much love to you all. Thank you so much, and just take care of yourselves. Ernie, it's a blessing. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Marianne.